Hello everyone, thank you for being here. So before I start, I want to give a normativity statement because following calls to embrace more normativity in land system sciences, I want to legitimately engage in ongoing deliberation, policy and practice. So the research questions and interpretations of the claims, these dissertations are normative and to be considered. But then they are dependent on my values, and these values could be the avoidance of physical and psychological suffering, covering up all human basic needs, existence of all living species, including those with little interest for human beings, and the functioning of ecosystems supporting all life on Earth. So I hereby invite all the listeners to consider this positionality, to constructively criticize the views of this dissertation, and engage in collaborative normative science. So nature is offering us a lot. It's providing us the food, the materials, it's pollinating our crops, it is storing the carbon, it is protecting us from floods or extreme events, it is offering water, it is also offering a lot of beauty for us to enjoy. But we are destroying this nature at a path never seen before, and a lot of this destruction is actually happening for the production and consumption of agricultural and forestry commodities. And these commodities are being increasingly traded internationally, especially since the new wave of neoliberal liberalization of international trade since the 80s. So this led me to this research question: how did the pressure on ecosystems embodied or related to this international trade of biomass products evolve during this very specific period of the neoliberal regime since the 80s? But first I want to explain what I understand by pressure on ecosystems, or at least how we measure it. And it's just one way to measure it, there's different ways, but the basic idea is that ecosystems get energy from the sun, and through a process called net primary production, plants grow, and this provides food, energy, and shelter for other species. But the more humans are appropriating this big cake, which we call the human appropriation of net primary production, the less we leave to other species, and this has impacts on ecosystems like reducing biodiversity, affecting carbon stocks, or soil degradation, but it's also used to discuss planetary boundaries related to ecosystems. In the first question, I will discuss how changes in the origin countries where we get our products from, how would that have affected the pressure on ecosystems. So what we found out is that in the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, actually changes in origin, mostly related to international trade within continents, did reduce this pressure on ecosystems with this indicator that we are using. But afterwards, global trade across continents have led to a degradation and less efficient global trade patterns. So what we got out of this is that this idea that trade liberalization would, as it is often mentioned, would always lead to more sustainability. This is very present in a lot of discourses, and that is a hopeful side effect of trade liberalization would be sustainability, is not happening, and we need regulation to counter care. On the other hand, we saw that origins matters less than what we produce and consume in trade and exchange. So in the next step, we discussed more the products and the supply chains, and especially focusing on this complex system of feed and animal products. And there's a dominant narrative when we talk about feed and animal products, is that, we in Western countries, we consume too much because people are too rich and they started living in cities. So we wanted to get rid of this and start showing the complexity that no, it's a whole system going from the producers, the feed producers, the animal product producers, the traders, and the final consumers. And the first step was to actually quantify the pressure on ecosystem related to this complex system. So we identified the link between trade flows of feed and trade flows of animal products, showed different regions, how different regions are acting differently. For example, Europe importing feed and exporting animal products, and how this affects the ecosystems. But especially in science, when we come to this question of reducing animal products, we always call it a demand-side measure. And so the call in this paper was to go beyond calling this demand-side measures, but calling it sufficiency measures, which happen all along the supply chain and not just for consumers. But now we go to the last step of this trade flow, which are the consuming countries. And we tried to think about what would be actually limits to the consumption of biomass products. And we found out that only 50% of the countries are nowadays are beyond or below the planetary boundary for land use, and that the trend is getting worse. But on the other hand, this was within a larger framework of a donut, where we see both social and ecological limits. And humanity has got closer to social foundations, but has been going beyond ecological boundaries. And for land use change, there was a discussion whether this boundary is actually appropriate to what we feel is correct. And so the idea was that we have to embrace the normativity of defining planetary boundaries. Summarizing the first paper, we saw that it's not always automatic that trade leads to more sustainability, so we need more regulation. In the second paper, we saw that a large share of the global pressure on ecosystems is linked to this complex system of feed and livestock, but that to reduce the pressure on ecosystems, we should not only think of demand-side measures being reducing and supply-side measures being more efficient, but combining both. And finally, we saw that there's more and more countries that live that consume too much, but that defining this limit is a very normative process. So coming back to my very first thing, the call for everybody is to embrace normativity in sustainability science.